Strange facts about well-known books. While researching for my newsletter, I came across a fact about Neil Gaiman's Coraline I didn't know. The book almost wasn't published. Neil's editor said it was going to traumatize kids, so he asked her to read it to her daughter and see if it was too scary. The girl said she was enjoying it every night, and they got through the whole book and she said it wasn't scary, so the book was published. Many years later, Neil got to talk to her about the book and she said she was absolutely terrified the whole time but wanted to know what was next, so she lied because she was worried that they'd stop reading the book if she said it was terrifying. Just think about it. The book got published because a kid lied about how scary it was. If you have some other such strange facts about well-known books, I would love to know about them. So do me a favor and put it down below. Frank Herbert's Dune was, after multiple rejections, finally published by Chilton's, publishers of automotive repair manuals. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer was one of the first novels to be written on a typewriter. In One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, its author, Ken Kesey, had written large portions of it while working in a psych hospital. Also, he said he threw a lot of them out, but he had written some of passages from Cuckoo's Nest on LSD. Always thought it was a cool read to try and figure out what passages written under the influence had stayed. If I had to guess, it's the description of the fog from the narrator. Steinbeck's final rough draft of Mice and Men was eaten shredded by his dog, forcing him to write it again. Virgil's The Aeneid, perhaps one of the greatest works in Western literature, almost never go published. He worked on it for over 10 years. Virgil suffered heat stroke and died. On his deathbed, he asked his friends to burn it. His friends refused, and later the Emperor Augustus ordered it published. Stephen King threw the manuscript to Carrie in the bin. It was his wife who took it out, uncrumpled the pages and convinced him to tidy it up and send it to a publisher. Beowulf survives in one manuscript collected by an antiquarian, Robert Cotton. It was damaged in a fire in the 18th century that destroyed another Anglo-Saxon fragment, the Battle of Mulden. Cotton collected rare manuscripts and filed them against busts of Roman emperors. So when you cite on his manuscripts you refer to the emperor it was classified against. Beowulf was against Vitellius, whereas Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, also the only known edition, is cited against Nero. Stephen King's first draft of the Dark Tower series was outlined while he was on mescaline. ETA Book 1. The Hunt for Red October was published in October 1984 and sold 45,000 copies by March 1985, entirely respectable. Then President Reagan said that he'd been given a copy for Christmas and that he really liked it and it was unputdownable, after which it shot to the top of bestseller lists and Tom Clancy no longer had to sell insurance for a living. To Kill a Mockingbird was more sprawling. The editor recommended focusing on the childhood part for brevity's sake. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland started from a story during a boat rowing with Carol, a friend of his, the 10-year-old Alice and her two sisters. It was one of several fanciful stories he made up during For Her, and this was the first she asked him to write down after For Her. It is hilarious to me that the response to "I'm afraid this story is scary enough to traumatize children" was "try it out on your kid and see if it traumatizes her." The original working title for War and Peace was All's Well That Ends Well. Charles Dickens had a pet raven named Grip. He immortalized him as an ornery, talking pet and companion of the main character in his book Barnaby Rudge. One American writer was a huge fan of Dickens and was greatly inspired by Grip when writing his own most famous work. The author? Edgar Allan Poe. The work? The Raven. Stephen King wrote Cujo in 2 weeks on speedballs, doesn't remember writing a word. Sonia Tolstoy copied her husband's manuscript of War and Peace 8-hand. Stephen King hated his first novel Carrie. He threw it away in the trash. His wife saved it and made sure it was published. When searching for costumes for the Wizard of Oz movie, the person in charge went to some thrift stores. When trying on a certain coat, they found a property tag in the pocket for L. Frank Baum, the author of Wizard of Oz. Golding worked as a schoolteacher in an exclusive British school for the sons of wealthy families, so Lord of the Flies was never meant to be a universal story about the human condition. It was specifically about the little Tory bastards he was forced to teach. Gabriel Garcia Marquez was broke when he wrote 100 Years of Solitude, or so he said, to the point where he recalls having to initially send only half of the book to Argentina, where it was first published, because he could not afford to send the whole weight of the pages. According to him, he had to sell the last of his family's valuable possessions and iron, I believe, so he could send the other half, which made his wife livid. Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein at the age of 19 on Dare. Not going to go through all comments to see if this was said before, but Fahrenheit 451 was first published in Playboy. It's probably more well known now, but Asimov's Foundation trilogy won the one-time Hugo Award for Best Series. Asimov himself thought the award was created to honor the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Apparently the reason Goblet of Fire ended up being so much longer than its predecessors was because after finishing it, JKR quickly realized a massive plot hole and spent ages expanding the plot to fill it in. Neuromancer, the novel that pretty much defined cyberpunk, the source of so much internet culture and technology, was written by Gibson on a typewriter and he had no experience working with computers before. Many people know that Dante wrote the Divine Comedy in exile, but few know that Machiavelli also wrote The Prince in Exile. In fact, it wasn't published until after his death. The book was also originally dedicated to Giuliano de' Medici, who might have been Machiavelli's lover. Virgil's Aeneid is famous as a great work of literature, but it is also a great piece of political propaganda, meant to tie Augustus closer to his legendary and even supposedly divine ancestry. Ernest Hemingway wrote so meticulously that he took an average of 8 hours to complete one page of writing. Robert Gottlieb, an editor at Simon Schuster, published Catch-22 but passed on A Confederacy of Dunces. The big takeaway from this thread. So many famous books were published due to one person the publisher knew reading it and loving it. It isn't as easy as people think to write, but if you can genuinely hook one person that doesn't feel obligated to support or love you, your chances of being published go up a lot. James Clavell's Shogun caused had such an effect of Japan's tourism, the perception of Japan, that the ruler of a Middle Eastern country offered him an oil tanker worth millions to write a book about their country. It's not a particularly well-known book itself, but it's hard to read The Wreck of the Titan by Morgan Robertson and not start imagining that he had the book dictated to him by a time traveler, at least not if you know anything about what happened to the Titanic. When Terry Brooks wrote The Sword of Shannara, he intended to kill off almost all the characters. His publisher asked how could a sequel be made if all the characters were dead, so he changed it. The sequel only has 2 characters from the first, and one was only in passing. Kafka never wanted any of his work published. He asked his friend to burn it all when he died, but his friend read it and liked it so much that he published it himself. Wait, the editor didn't want to publish it for fear of traumatizing kids, so instead she read it to her own daughter? Not well known per se, but Metro 2033 was inspired by a book known as Roadside Picnic and was essentially fanfiction up until someone finally published it into an actual book. 50 Shades of Grey was written as Twilight fanfiction originally as well. I didn't know Neil Gaiman had written Coraline until I bought the book recently. Mickey Spillane bet a friend that he could write a book in which the final line would be the big reveal to the story. He did, and it's called Vengeance is Mine, in case you want to cheat and look up the last line. Bret Easton Ellis sued the makers of Zoolander for copying the idea from his book Glamorama and won. It's debatable if Homer was even an actual person or not. It is generally agreed upon that the Iliad and the Odyssey were written by different authors. Gloria Steinem famously crusaded against the publication of American Psycho only to later marry Christian Bale's father. Maybe not about a specific book, but about an author. Despite her books focusing on courtship, Jane Austen never married. She was engaged, but only for a few hours before she changed her mind and broke it off. Opp just crowdsourced his research by putting one fact in. These are neat. Coleridge's poem Kubla Khan has one of my favorite stories told to me by my professor in college. Coleridge wrote the poem about a dream while in an opium-fueled haze. Unfortunately, he was interrupted by a knock on the door. When he returned to his poem, the inspiration was gone, so the poem remains forever uncompleted. I wish there was an IMDb-type website for books. Wow, we can only imagine how many books we didn't even get a chance to read because of things like that. Despite making Poe a household name almost instantly, he was only paid $9 for his submission of The Raven. Lovecraft was never able to support himself as an author, and his works only gained popularity posthumously, much like Van Gogh. Copernicus did not publish his book De Revolutione Sorbium Coelestium on the revolutions of the celestial spheres until shortly before his death. He was afraid of the Catholic Church reaction. Fahrenheit 451 was published in Playboy. Till Coraline was written by Neil Gaiman. Many years later, Neil got to talk to her about the book and she said she was absolutely terrified the whole time but wanted to know what was next, so she lied because she was worried that they'd stop reading the book if she said it was terrifying. Didn't Roald Dahl say something like that children enjoy being frightened by things they know aren't real and can hurt them? Fun fact: I read Coraline as a kiddo and I was traumatized AF because of that book. Clearly remember lying in my bed that night thinking about the crawling hand of the mother breaking into my room when everyone's asleep like in the book. Jack Kerouac typed on the road on a 120 scroll of paper he taped together, and did it without any paragraph breaks.